Okay, hello. It's a super rainy day here in Toronto, and I got triggered. I'll admit it. Kevin Wolf over in X, he posted an image of this Joe Kubert genius Atom and Hawkman cover, so it kind of triggered me to jump in and make this video. So I've been thinking about this for a while to discuss composition, and I'm going to do my best here to cover it, some of the basic ideas. And I think you'll hear some new things that people don't always cover. So I've got a number of different covers I could probably analyze and cover this way, but and get into the discussion about it. But this one alone was so good that I decided just to do a video on it. And in the cover image of this video, I'll put the color version. Hopefully I'll remember that. Okay, so what am I talking about? Like, you look at this cover and it's better in color because you've got more drama. But it's like a perfect example of understanding and use of compositional eye paths in creating a dramatic image. And this is like the so-called old school approach to comic covers, where there's a kind of all-in-one moment image that is a story moment, usually a very suspenseful story moment, and it is designed on purpose to pull you in and make you buy that comic and make you want to read the story and understand what's going on and find out more. Now, of course, that wasn't always the case, because sometimes you'd buy the comic and the cover was off or completely different in some cases. But regardless, that was the kind of approach that was used back then in comics covers, whereas nowadays it's drifted much more so, in my opinion, as a generality, into being very illustrative, where the idea is that there's not really a story suspense moment being created in one image. It's simply, a pin-up showing the characters like striking a pose, either straight at the camera or off screen. In some cases, there's something dramatic maybe blowing up, or there's a montage of different characters. But there aren't very many, I think, that combine story, a moment, and text. Now, this one doesn't have the usual blurbs and word balloons, which is actually cool in itself. And both are completely viable, because the covers that have word balloons and captions and what do they call them, just display boxes, those can add a ton of context too, and give a richness to the scene that you wouldn't know otherwise. It can give you alternate information. But in this case, it's very dramatic, because you just see this stark image with a lot of black on the cover of Hawkman totally wounded. And you'll forgive me, I don't remember the name of this character. Is it the Horseman? He's got horseshoes. Was there an earlier Horseman? Anyway, the fans, I'm sure, will tell me in the comments. But I mean, I read Hawkman, Joe Kubert's Hawkman, as a kid and just loved it, just absolutely loved it. But I don't remember now. But anyway, we've got Hawkman here brutalized, and he's lying back. And then there's this character riding away who's obviously just trampled him, because he's got all these horseshoe marks over here all over him. And poor old Hawkman is just suffering badly and unconscious. So it's like, what will happen next? Why did this happen? Will he get away with it? Will our hero recover and stand up and fly again and fight back? So classic Joe Kubert. He's known, for his kind of bravura inking and that kind of loose style. And as with Jack Kirby, you often find that when people are, acolytes of Joe Kubert, they follow that kind of surface thing. And Jack Kirby, people copy the non-literal anatomical thing, the squiggles, the Kirby crackle dots, space dots, and with Joe Kubert, it's that rough kind of inking, and I'm turning around so we can see some of this. He's got the very loose approach and a mixture of clear line work, bold lighting, often rim lighting. Like you see here, he's put a backlight. He's got the ground behind black so you can see the edge of the form. and then he's got a coarse shadow, and then hatching to taper the form and turn it. And he does very rough hatching, which itself creates a kind of texture. He didn't put it everywhere. He's very careful to balance it out, which your eye needs. And there's a kind of a, a general, to Joe Kubert, it's a kind of a general, not slashy, but just rough, confident thing, which of course he was so good at figure drawing and composition that he could get away with that. But my point I'm leading to here is that the underlying thing about Joe Kubert, and even Jack Kirby and a lot of others, but here's Joe Kubert, is he was a master of composition. I'm going to try and get into that and break that down a bit. And I'll use it to point to underpinnings or fundamentals of composition that I maintain very strongly exist in all kinds of other art. And once you understand the principle, you can go and see this happening in other examples of art. So what am I talking about? Well, I've made a grayed out, a couple here in case I need more, grayed out versions of this. And I'll go back to this for a second. The main principle I'm going to talk about is something called eye path. And eye path is the art of leading your eye around the picture so that it's moving, but then it strategically rests or slows down or stops, lingers or pauses at the focal points that the artist has decided are important. And you can't make everything important. So you end up with like a pyramid, a hierarchy, the many smaller, lesser important things, and then a diminishing number of more and more important things, leading to 1, 2, or 3 crucial things that you want your audience to look at. So here, what do we have? You've got, of course, the title at the block at the top, and it's the identifying information. So that would be at the top because it's, it's on a rack and the top's poking out. You want the kid or the grown person to grab that off the rack, and that was me back then, and buy it. Except I didn't have this one, and it's great. So that's, in this particular instance of a cover, you've got the standard component, which is the top title. You don't have other pieces that are being juggled, which some covers got very busy, and you've got, like I said earlier, captions, word balloons, different elements like that. But here you've got 2 other things, really. I mean, you've got the general scene, which people can gather at a glance, but then your eye starts examining. And what you see is you've got this horseman guy, and he's silhouetted against the moon purposely, right? And he's been strategically put so that his hat just pokes out a little bit off the top. And of course, there's a stark contrast. There's the highest amount of contrast there, particularly if you see the color cover. But you can even see it here because you've got this generalized mass of a lot of dark, and you've got this big circular white element here. And you've got all these lines, which you can clearly see. That's why I chose this cover and got so enthusiastic about it. You can clearly see the idea of a connecting path leading your eye through the cover, round and round, but stopping at certain places. So to finish my first point, there's 3 in my analysis, depending on how you slice it up, if you want to get pedantic, but there's 3 or 4. But there's like the copy block, there's the villain who's done his dirty deed, and there's Hawkman, particularly Hawkman's face and head, where you're going to land. And so what Joe has done here, if I dare call him Joe, I didn't know him, but I don't think he'd mind. It's just so genius and brilliantly done. And it's done with understanding. See, it's a sleight of hand because he's not trying to alert you. He's not saying, hey, look at me, but it's built into the composition where if you don't understand what it is, you're going to kind of just accept it. But you're going to go, wow, that's really smooth and great. It really works. But it's done with conscious knowledge of how to structure and build this in behind while you're drawing. And it's not about rendering and lines and fancy hatching and all that sort of super slick stuff. It's about the actual arrangement of your different pieces of your composition to do, it's almost like a machine to do what you want it to do. Take the viewer's eye to the places where you want. And it's a matter of creating places of high contrast and focal attention. And you do that by pathways, and you do it by controlling and manipulating where the viewer's attention goes. So again, the first one being pathways and pointers. First general thing is, if you look at this here, I use my color thing, it's going to show up better. Look at how there's a line going through here, and then it kind of comes back around, and you end up at Hawkman's head, and then you're going to, of course, travel along your pathways because your eye travels along lines or pathways. That's what it does. I mean, otherwise, you're just darting around randomly and frantically. No, our eyes are trained, and we know to look along lines. Lines take you places, you know. So if you have a line like this, it's got a certain character. If you've got a line like this, it's got a different character, but your eye goes along it. If you've got dots that seem to connect, your eye's going to follow them. So you do that actually with compositional elements or shapes. And here again, Joe Kubert has arranged it so well. He's also featured, if you see here, the hand by breaking it out against the sky. See, he's got Hawkman's hand kind of clawing there, like, and he's got the horseman. Sorry, I don't know his name. Horseman guy. He's got no reins on his horse too. I guess he's a ghost horseman. Very nice. He's holding the reins probably or something, but they're invisible. Anyway, his hands are silhouetted against the moon there, and you've got Hawkman's two hands that are clearly displayed. And there's a number of very cool things. Like you see, he's always breaking out little moments. I'm going to do a full shape thing in a second here, which will show this more. But if you look at some key points, I'll do it on this one, which is the darker one. This one's darker, so maybe that'll show up better on the video. If you can see how he's always breaking little things. See how this hat breaks the circle of the moon? And then the leg takes you down. And where does it pick up? It picks up on his knee here. See how Hawkman's knee has been artfully designed to break out of the line of this hill? And the same with this one feather. If Joe had just had it touching the rock, that's a rock there, it would be like what you call a tangent. It would be boring. And if he had just made this, I won't do it because I want to follow the actual shapes here. But let's say he had just made this line straight. You just got a boring hill. So what he did is he broke it out with a rock like this. My hand's wobbly. I haven't been drawing today, but anyway. And you see how he's got that little poking feather there in the knee? And what they are, they're connector pathways that can take your eye down, like it's like a handoff in football, you know, like a running back. Here, take it, you know, or like in rugby, right? Here, take the ball, and and the next guy take it. So that's what you have to do with the eye, is build a pathway. So same thing as it goes around here. And here we have this hand. I'll just trace that. And again, if you do this, trace stuff, there's absolutely nothing wrong with tracing things. Like, you can learn so much by looking and doing what I'm doing is sit down and analyze and study. Like, it's not being a weird geek to do this. It's actually getting into the core of your craft. It's studying, how do these things actually work? And when you look at so many of these older artists, these things I'm talking about are not a matter of personal style. They all did them. They all knew this underlying craft, whether it's Will Eisner or Wally Wood or Alex Toth or Jack Kirby, or I could name, keep going. They all understood how to arrange things in a way that is very rarely seen today. There are some brilliant artists working today that do know this, and you can see it right away once you get the principle. And I'm not naming names because I'm not trying to piss anybody off by either being named or not being named or any of that stuff. Drama is not my thing about this. It's about craft and about understanding this stuff, and that's the true excitement, not the drama. The excitement is when you actually get this, that there's a principle you can grab onto and that it actually is going to work. Then you start going down a different road. You start finding different people that are doing this. You start analyzing how much different people use this, and you can try and keep reminding yourself to build it into your artwork. And again, it's not a strict rule. It's like a principle. Anyway, so you see how he's got the tree here. What Joe had done here is he's got this line of the hill. Going back to analyzing the shapes and the movements here. And it would be too boring if you just had a straight line right across. You just like slash, you're cutting the cover. So he popped up a rock here to block your eye, and he popped up this tree because he needed something over here. See this tree over here? See that dead spiky tree, which of course adds an aura of like spooky deadness. It's a dead tree, it has no leaves, right? It helps give that grim, deathly kind of thing. So what he did is he's like, oh, well, if I have nothing there, it's all black. The eye's going to go right off the page, and you're going to lose the momentum. So he blocked it off with another element which gives him more interest to the cover. A dead tree, a rock. Gives a little more mood and location and interest without overwhelming it. Because there's a bleak thing, because he had the discipline to keep the sky black. There's no stars, there's no clouds, there's no other fancy crap that he could have rendered in. He just made it black. And it's a very stark kind of dramatic thing. So now he's got this tree here. This tree has been designed like all of this. I'm going to try and quickly trace the shapes. So bear with me, okay? Because I can hardly see poor Hawkman on this. I'm going to do it really roughly. There's shapes and subshapes, so I'm not going to really be able to trace everything, but I'm going to try and do the main thing. And you'll see the logic of this. Subshapes, I mean, like say this hand here that I'm tracing, it's got its own shape. I'm doing it quickly because I don't want to make this video, as always, 4 hours long. But I'm just going to do the main silhouette of Hawkman's body, but there's sub shapes like his belt and all that cut it up inside. And it's all done with a knowledge of something I talked about in other videos. It's called silhouetting. He's always, here's a fancy word, cognizant, aware of the silhouette shapes of each component. And I guess I could cut this up a bit to show you with my wobbly hands. It's a pleasing, strong thing that you can read by itself. You can see that's a figure. It's not a bunch of weird lumpy things. You've got a strong silhouette showing Hawkman. And here's got more of his wings that have been splayed out here. You've got the horseshoes. I don't know if you can hear the rain, but it's a nice backdrop here. It's belting down. See how he's broken the shape with a feather here? It's overlapping this horseshoe shape. That's depth. He's always thinking about depth. Let's move this extra one out of the way. Okay. And he's got a couple other random shapes here. I'm looking at because I can hardly see on this printout. But here, for example, why did he put this extra twig? Because when he was drawing this, he's going, oh, it's a little dead there. If I just made that straight across, it would be a stop point. There'd be too much emptiness and your eye would stop there, but he doesn't want your eye to stop here. He wants your eye to keep going. So he gives you a bounce point. It sends you on your way up there, your eye. This tree here, this dead tree. And you've got another pointer. They're all pointers. They're pointing you up towards Mr. Horseman guy. So here's Horseman guy. I can't even see this horse. He's barely indicated, which is cool. He's dropped off into darkness. And again, he didn't over-render it, but there's enough to pick up the basic movement with these white shapes that are just there. And let's just do this roughly. What I did here is I made a file. I just saved it on my computer as is. On Photoshop, I made I think in this one it was a 70% white layer that just blanked it out, flattened that and printed it out. So I got 30% gray if it matters. Just enough that you can see it but work over it. And so, okay, so we've got these characters here. There'd be the horse here, and his front legs aren't even shown, so I won't bother trying to, you know. What else have we got? Let's just trace quickly the silhouettes of the title block. These old things were so nicely designed, even though they're quick paste ups. But look at the shape we got here. I'm going to kind of do it roughly again as a big thing. You could break it down into those subshapes. See, the 12 cents even balances because you need something there. If you don't have something there, you're going to be like an empty spot that will attract too much attention. The code, the blocks, and you've got this banner taking you across the top. They're all designed to keep your eye inside and circulating around. So you've got corner blocks, which are blocking off. There's sort of an angle thing happening there. And look at how this shape, the whole shape of this Atom and Hawkman alone, this whole thing, if you can see, it's like a big pointer thing that's taking you into this horse guy. See, so they don't have the type touching the moon and ruining all that, those silhouettes. They've got interesting giant shapes that are created here in the composition. This is not a matter of fancy drawing, like I keep saying. Drawing is a separate study. This is about the arrangement of shapes on a 2D page. See how this takes you in? You're going around here, and then you hit this as a combined sort of mega shape. That title block is beautifully angling in, and of course he's made this angle of the hill the other way. Like if he had made the hill straight, or the hill this way, there'd be too many angles going this way. So what Kubert's done is a balance. He's got this angle this way, and he's got the angle this way, and it creates also a sense of perspective because it's converging in over here, right? You've got this going this way, and this going this way, and it gives you a sense of diminishment, like the way perspective lines go towards the horizon. And of course, Hawkman's body works with that because he's got him diminishing, right? There's a sense of perspective going here. See if I can get this in. And again, I got the rain pounding down in the background. I don't know if it's showing up on my iPhone, but it's a kind of a musical accompaniment to my video. So the whole thing is showing how he's created pathways and subpathways, like for your eye to keep circulating. Like I said already, you've got number 1, the title block, all of it really, with subparts. You've got number 2, and you've got number 3, Hawkman. And he's intrigued it to take your eye flowing along these pathways. Here it can hop across here, keep going down, and you find Hawkman's face. Either way, like it could be this way or this way, clockwise or counterclockwise. You're going to end up on the hand here, but you're also going to sort of jump up here. And then this particularly is going to take you up, and you're going to bounce there, because you don't have to have it one connected thing where it's like pedantically connected like in one exact stream. You can leave gaps. This is the whole art of creating movement in a picture, is where the gaps are and where the joins are. So it's like you have stopping points and you have points of movement, and then another stopping point that might be bigger, and then maybe 1 or 2, maybe they branch and they go back. There could be endless combinations and permutations of this, but which is where the art and the interest comes in. But the underlying principle is always the same. You're moving the eye around, you're taking them to focal points, you're trying to block the corners off because you do not want people to lock into the corners. This is classical composition. You'll see it in classical paintings of all kinds and other kinds of realistic art, even sometimes in decorative art. But here, of course, I'm talking about realistic drawing and realistic illustrative art. Yeah, you're blocking off the corners. You see here? You do not want, because the corners are like eye traps, they're like dead zones. So you don't want the eye to be trapped or stopped where you don't want it. So you give little jumping off points. And see here how there's 2 pathways here. This is like a secondary pathway. This little branch, like I said earlier, it's again flinging you up towards this guy. But it's really a glorious sense of movement here he's done. Like, look at, if he'd taken this out, I'm going to kill this on purpose. You know, say he just did that. I mean, it's just not as good. I can't go back now because I've marked my own printout over. But see how it's, and if he just did this, and you could go on more. I could use whiteout, I suppose. But hopefully by now, people watching who are studying art, as opposed to just looking at it, you know, you're going to get the principle. See, that's lost that glorious movement. See this cape furling in the wind? Because it's a still medium. There's no movement. It's not animation. So in a still drawing, you're trying to convey everything you can. You're trying to get people to look where you want them to look and not look in other places. So in that aspect is not fancy rendering and drawing and hatching and all that stuff. That's what everyone gets lost in. Believe me, I used to do that. I sometimes still do it. I'm working on something and I go, whoa, you lost the big picture. You lost the connection of the elements. You lost the balance where you make the highest points of contrast, like here against the moon, and detail. Like you can lose that, and then the thing starts falling apart. You get frustrated. You're not quite sure what to fix or what to change, and it's a whole mess. And you know, sometimes you throw it away and walk away, or crumple it up, or start over. But once you discern these underlying things, once you get enough under your belt and really, which is what I'm trying to do here, once you are tipped off to how this stuff works, it can solve so many problems, because then you start having a basis to decide which way to go. Do I go add this or take it out? And that relates to things like the story moment, the goal of the thing, like I said, about mood, whether you should have a lot of the details in the background. There's basic other art principles. There's a lot to this, but there's other art principles like you can't put detail everywhere. You have to give the eye some rest. So here, unlike today's artists, what did Joe do here? Mr. Kubert, what he did is, see how he's got more detail on the face, the hatching? Yeah, he could have hatched the hell out of this. He could have put all sorts of hatching all over here. He could have added more muscle lines here on the arms, you know. He could have gone to town. But no, he understands that this is all not only a illustrative rendering thing. It's not a question. It's not only a question of that. It's a question of the 2D, what I call the 2D language. It's arranging the moments of detail and contrast to make the viewer's eye go where you want it without realizing that it's being compelled to do so. So he made enough of a pattern here of, I'll zoom back a bit to help. He made enough of a pattern here of contrast, but then because your eyes are naturally going to stop here because you've got this head, this cross line, he put more detail here because you tend to naturally look at faces and heads. That's where people's eyes and expression are. So they are like built-in, inherent, natural focal points. And here, he wanted the head to be the focal point, so you got already the fact that people are going to look there even though it's upside down. And then he helped it by adding more detail and contrast and dramatic lighting. He laid off here actually on the lighting he could have put in potentially under the arms and stuff. And it's very interesting when you examine the choices and you think, okay, how would I have done that? And sometimes you leave out even shadows or things for the purpose of attention. Like I'm suspecting that here he didn't put in, I don't know if this is right, you can have theories, but say he had put in, would it be better or worse if he had put in like under Hawkman's chesticles there? You know, he could have done that. Maybe he was in a hurry. Maybe it still would work. Sure, Joe would forgive me for drawing over a printout of his cover, but he didn't go to town like, you know, modern artists will go to town and sometimes very nicely, other times not so much. They'll render the hell out of all the muscles and stuff. Okay, that's all great, but what about the composition and storytelling? You know, that's the key thing, is in selling the thing. That actually looks okay to me, although you do look more at this place of contrast. And I suspect the earlier version that you saw, he left that out because he wanted you to look at this horseshoe. And I don't know, I can't speak for Joe Kubert. I don't know if he did that consciously. Many artists from that era, I don't know if they could have delivered an analysis, you know, this is how I'm going to round this out. I don't know if they would have gone into this length of a half-hour video explaining all this. They picked up these things, they used them. Joe Kubert obviously started a school, so I think he probably would have been able to explain this. Certainly my hero and mentor, somewhat mentor, Alex Toth, he could explain all this stuff, and great regret is I didn't interview him more before he passed away, but I did do the one interview in the Comic Book Artist magazine. But Alex was who turned me on to being analytical. You know, you draw, that's fine. You don't have to be sitting there thinking about everything, every single thing, and freeze yourself up. That's not the point of this. It's not the point. The point is that you have a time for study, you think about this stuff, you understand these principles, you try and digest them, internalize them, and then when you set them aside from your conscious mind, you sit there and draw, it comes out. And I believe that someone like Joe Kubert or many of these other artists, you know, Nick Cardy, all kinds of them, the Marvel artist, John Buscema, they all use similar principles. And I think that they probably had internalized them enough in their art school training when these principles were embodied in all kinds of art that you would see in the common culture back then. They had internalized them enough that they used them as built-in principles and guideposts, right? So then it just came out in the art, and it governed their choices. So that's my plea here, is that if you like all these older artists and you want to have that real solid quality, you've got to get yourself to follow, for a younger artist, like, or for anyone who wants to listen, you've got to go on that pathway of digging through and we have so much available. All these older pieces of art, and put an analytical mode of thought into your approach, right? Like, I've given you a thing about pathways, stopping points, focal points, hierarchies, where you focus attention by using contrast and pointer lines and cross intersections, breaking silhouettes, like I said earlier. Your eye will go to things that break, you know, like again, if you've got this, it's just a line. There's no particular look. If I put a dot there, you're going to go there. It's as simple as that. As they say, simple as. If you know, oh, there's a bump there. What is it? You know, or there's a dip. You know, what is it? Right? Your eye is like a curious gossip that is examining things and trying to figure out what to look at. And of course, it's not going to stop at the spots where nothing's happening. It's going to keep traveling down the highway, chunking along until it finds something interesting. And that's what you do when you walk down the street. You're looking at, you know, different stores, people passing by. You see some person dressed freaky, or you see a store with an unusual thing, or there's like an explosion in the distance, God forbid, whatever, right? You look there. It's a point of interest. So you use that principle when you make your covers. And I probably more or less explained it. I think I'll probably stop there. As you can tell, I get very enthusiastic about this, because one last thing I should say is, when I said that all these people earlier that we revere as great art comics geniuses, that they didn't necessarily do this consciously, I mean that. They were not necessarily really understanding this in a way to give a speech about it. But they had understood it, and that is what their learning process had been in some way. So my pathway was not to be an intuitive, natural person who did this. I had some things I was good at when I was a kid, some things I was very good at, but a lot of things I really struggled with, like, and you'll just have to take my word for it. So any of this stuff, it was because to talk about myself for a moment, I resolved I want to be better, I want to keep getting better, and there's no other choice that I have to kind of study and figure out, because if it doesn't come to you naturally in some genius way, like, you know, I suspect there are not that many, then you have to start digging and figure this stuff out. Now, unlike some of those earlier artists, like John Buscema or Alex Toth, they may have been graced to be in a time or have access to really good art courses like Art Center Design. I'm not sure of the names. In New York City, there's the Art Students League. People like Norman Rockwell went there. There's the online, or not online, there was no online back then. There's the mail order famous artist course, and so on and so on. So I'm sure that a lot of these artists, and then looking at each other's work and all the published work back then, they were picking up these principles, sometimes intuitively. But if you're on your own, like me, I grew up in Ottawa in my room in, you know, the suburbs of 1970s Ottawa. I was trying to figure this stuff out. And when I came across Alex Toth talking about this stuff in some of his essays, then later in my 20s when I started corresponding with him, he was a guy who was just like, it lit me up, because he clearly was genius, but he also understood what he was doing. He could explain it to you, which was like a revelation, that there actually was a coherent, comprehensible principle behind this stuff. And of course, that leads you to going onwards and looking up all sorts of older material that I've been tweeting on X about, like Andrew Loomis and lots of other books. At some point on my website or somewhere, I'm going to make a list of recommended books. But anyway, that's my rant on a rainy day rants. And not really a rant, but I encourage anybody who's an aspiring artist or anyone else who's interested, follow this pathway, use analysis, make some printouts of your favorite covers, and dig down, spend some time. It's actually fascinating when you look beyond the mere surface that excites you and try and see it's like the gear wheels and mechanics, just as writers would, you know, screenplay writers, the writers at Pixar, for example, and all kinds of other people talk about the mechanics of storytelling. And it's the same for art. Art is not mystical completely. There's a mystical component of what you come up with personally, but the craft and the building structure and these kind of techniques, that is not mystical. There's endless things you can just sit down and learn. But of course you have to do it. Anyway, thank you for listening. It's 35 minutes, and I hope you enjoyed that and found it useful. If you did, please like and comment Share this everywhere. It really does help get visibility. I'm trying to keep growing my channel. And subscribe, of course, to the channel, and follow me on X, always under Rocket Fiction. And have a great day.